She had been laughing when the first bone snapped. Not from joy, no. That sound was a jagged shard lodged somewhere between defiance and inevitability. The kind of laugh that came from knowing you'd stepped through the wrong door on purpose. The Virex thought they'd caught her in a sweep meant for smugglers and black market translators. In truth, she'd walked into their net with both eyes open, a paper bag of oranges under her arm, and a smile just wide enough to be mistaken for surrender. The shackles were cold, not the polite kind of cold you found in a winter kitchen, but the kind that seemed to leech intent for muscle. They locked around her wrists with a soft hiss, the faint scent of ionized air rising like a warning. A uniformed guard with skin like dull copper watched her without blinking. He was young, too young to understand that certain prey didn't run because they had nowhere to go. They didn't run because they wanted to see what the trap looked like from the inside. The detention hall was a long white throat leading to a square room, so clean it might have been cut from bone. Rows of alien eyes tracked her in unison, round vertical slit, some with triple lids that blinked in a slow, unnerving rhythm. The air hummed with machinery, distant voices, and the faint throb of an energy core somewhere deep beneath the floors. She took all of it in without turning her head, storing the rhythm of the hum, the placement of each exit, the way certain guards shifted to keep her in their peripheral vision. The Virex High interrogator sat behind a slab of metal the color of dried blood, his posture a sculpture of contempt. His voice came out clipped, like each word was sharpened before release. Name. She offered it without inflection. Not the one in her file. The one she knew would take them a moment to verify, just enough to rattle their timing. Baba Yaga, she said softly, as if it were a shared joke. A ripple moved through the room. Some of the younger officers smirked. Others frowned, searching memory archives they didn't have. He glanced at the Dorlan standing in the corner, a tall, willowy alien with skin like wet stone and eyes that seemed to look past her, into the geometry of the air around her head. The Dorlan didn't smirk. They adjusted the cuff of their robe and said nothing, which told her everything she needed to know. There was one in the room who'd heard the name before. They stripped her of her coat and sat her at the interrogation table, the metal surface warm as if someone had been sitting there minutes before. The cuffs locked into recessed slots with a magnetic click. She rolled her shoulders slowly, a small stretch that looked like discomfort, but was simply her marking the limits of movement. The questions came quickly. Where had she been hiding? Who had given her access to Virex-guarded space? What information had she smuggled through their border gates? She smiled as though every word they spoke reminded her of a good recipe she'd once forgotten. She answered with the rhythm of an old woman talking to a neighbor across a fence. When I was 9, she began, a bear wandered into my village. They told us not to move, not to speak, but my grandmother, she poured it a bowl of milk and watched it drink. You know what that bear did? It stayed. Every winter after, it came back for more. The Virex interrogator slammed a palm against the table. Your allegories are irrelevant. Answer the question. She tilted her head, as though she'd been listening for something in the ceiling. I am answering. You simply don't understand the language yet. The Dorlan's gaze narrowed. They stepped forward, stopping just outside the circle of light above her chair. Your tone suggests you believe yourself in control here. I believe I'm having tea, she replied, glancing around. Though it seems you forgot the tea. A laugh came from somewhere in the back of the room, quickly silenced by a hiss from another guard. The Virex leaned forward, voice dropping into something meant to intimidate. You think this is a game? You were captured during a military lockdown. That is not survivable for humans. She gave a small shrug, the kind of gesture that could mean resignation or boredom. That depends on how you define survival. The first hour was a rhythm of accusation and refusal. They pressed, she sidestepped. Each time they tried to corner her with a direct question, she laid down another breadcrumb of memory. Snippets about growing tomatoes in cold soil, about sharpening knives not for cooking, but for waiting. To an alien ear, it was nonsense. To anyone who'd fought a winter with nothing but determination, it was a blueprint. Eventually, the Virex dismissed the others, leaving only himself, the Dorlan, and 2 guards with their rifles angled low. The air grew heavier, as if the ventilation system had slowed. "You'll tell us what you know," the Virex said. "Not in riddles. Not in stories. In data." She met his gaze, unblinking. "And if I do, you'll think you've won. That would be a shame." The Dorlan spoke for the first time in a voice like falling water. "You are not afraid of us." "No," she said plainly. "Why not?" "Because I came here," she replied. And the silence after was a deep, living thing. He didn't see her shift her fingers against the table, testing the slight give in the cuffs. She didn't need to, not yet. But she wanted to know if she could. One guard's breathing was faster now. The other's grip on the rifle was too tight. Both were tells. The Virex began listing the charges against her: trespassing in restricted zones, suspected sabotage of their transport networks, contact with outlawed factions. She listened, as if he were reciting weather reports. The words meant nothing. The tone everything. Every syllable confirmed what she had already suspected. They didn't know the half of it. Her stomach growled once, low and deliberate. "Is there really no tea?" she asked again. The Virex sneered. "You mock us with your primitive requests." She leaned forward as far as the cuffs would allow. "Where I come from, the polite thing to do before killing someone is to offer them a warm drink. It's civilized. I assumed you'd want to be civilized." The Dorlan's head tilted, and for the first time their gaze met hers fully. Something like understanding flickered there, brief but sharp. It was not recognition of a name. It was recognition of a type. They changed tactics, bringing in a holographic map of human space. Markers glowed in amber, where they believed resistance cells hid. She studied the map in silence for a moment, then said, "Your coordinates are off. Entirely the wrong season for that region. Supplies won't move until the rivers thaw." The Virex's eyes narrowed. "You admit you know their supply lines." She smiled faintly. "I admit I know how seasons work." An hour in, they tried to break her rhythm with noise, sharp bursts of static, mechanical shrieks meant to disorient. She closed her eyes and hummed something under her breath, low and even. The static didn't mask it. The guards began to shift uncomfortably. The Virex cut the noise. "What is that?" "A lullaby," she said. "I learned it from a woman who once hid from wolves for 3 days." She sang to keep her heartbeat steady. The Dorlan's expression changed again, this time to something colder. They stepped closer. "You were not caught. You arrived here intentionally." Baba Yaga smiled without warmth. "It took you less than an hour. You're quicker than your friends." The Virex slapped the table. "Why? Why come here?" She glanced at the door, then at the ceiling. "I like seeing kitchens before I cook in them. This is no kitchen." Her voice softened to something almost kind. "Oh, it is. You just haven't realized what's on the menu." For a long moment, no one moved. The hum of the energy core below filled the silence. Somewhere far off, a siren pulsed twice, then stopped. She tilted her head, listening. "Shift change," she murmured, more to herself than to them. The Virex gestured sharply, and the guards unlocked her cuffs just enough to transfer her to another chamber. As they guided her out, the Dorlan fell into step beside her. "If you are what I suspect," they said softly, "your being here will bring only ruin." She didn't look at them. "That depends on your definition of ruin." They brought her to a holding cell with a single bench and a wall of shimmering containment light. She sat, elbows on her knees, staring at the floor as though lost in thought. In truth, she was counting heartbeats. 37 per minute. Slow enough to make any medic wonder if she was entirely alive. She thought about the oranges she'd left behind, about the timing of the next guard rotation, about the fact that no one had yet searched the lining of her coat. Outside the cell, the Dorlan lingered, their eyes dark and reflective, held on her face as if waiting for a mask to slip. She met that gaze once, briefly, and something like a silent conversation passed between them. Neither smiled. She leaned back against the wall, closing her eyes. The Virex believed they'd placed her in a cage. The Dorlan suspected they'd just stepped into hers. And somewhere, deep under the mechanical hum of the station, she felt the first faint tremor of the thing she'd come here to find. An opportunity. It would not be long now. The first scream was not hers. It came from somewhere down the corridor, sharp and abrupt, followed by the hiss of a door sealing. The sound cut off as quickly as it had begun, leaving a ringing in the air that seemed to settle into the bones. Baba Yaga sat very still on the narrow bench, her wrists locked again in the humming cuffs, eyes half-lidded as though drowsy. In truth, she was listening, not to the voices, but to the absences between them. The Virex didn't waste time. They came for her with the brisk efficiency of those who thought pain was just another tool. 2 guards, the young copper-skinned one, and an older officer with a scar that bisected the ridges above his eyes, lifted her by the arms. The Dorlan followed at a measured pace, saying nothing. The hallway narrowed, the walls taking on a faint metallic tang that told her she was nearing the place where they stored their most unpleasant instruments. The interrogation chamber had changed. The table was gone. In its place was a lattice of vertical poles and hanging lines, the kind used to suspend a subject, so weight was distributed unevenly. Her shackles clicked into place along those lines. The floor beneath her shifted with every movement, making balance impossible. The Virex interrogator stood off to one side, hands clasped behind his back as though about to observe a lesson. His voice was almost conversational. "We will dispense with the riddles now." She tilted her head toward him. "You assume the truth lives in straight lines. It doesn't." He ignored her. A guard touched a panel, and the first wave of current passed through the lines. It was not the cinematic jolt most beings feared. It was subtler, more intimate. Muscles locked, lungs seized, and heat pooled in strange places under the skin. She exhaled slowly when it ended, as if measuring the distance between tolerable and intolerable. They escalated. Sound pulses tuned to human inner ear resonance, designed to induce nausea and disorientation, filled the chamber. She swallowed against it, eyes fixed on the Dorlan, who stood in the shadowed corner, hands folded. If they were hoping to see fear, they would have to look elsewhere. "You'll break your toys before you break me," she said, voice thin but steady. The Virex moved closer, inspecting her like a craftsman dissatisfied with a tool. "Humans claim endurance. They die quickly enough." "Everything dies quickly enough," she replied. "The question is what it does first." The next method was less subtle. The poles shifted, pulling her arms wide and forcing her feet from the floor. She felt the ache in her shoulders bloom into fire. Still she counted heartbeats, tracing each one like a thread in her mind. She knew where she was in the rhythm, knew how long before the shift change. Every second here was a bead on a string she intended to pull tight at the right moment. They began asking the same questions again, voices rising. She gave them small pieces of nothing, details about the weather in places they'd never been, the price of bread in a city destroyed decades ago. Between each answer, she breathed deliberately, training her body to remember calm even as they tried to burn it away. The older guard finally lost patience. A device the size of his palm pressed to the base of her neck, sending a concentrated surge of energy straight into the nerves. Her jaw locked. For the first time, she made a sound, a sharp intake of breath that could have been a gasp or a laugh. They mistook it for the former. The Dorlan moved at last, stepping forward until they were just inside the light. Their eyes were dark and still. "You are wasting time," they said to the Virex. "She will not yield what you think she has." "She will yield or she will end," the interrogator snapped. Baba Yaga let her head drop forward, voice low. "I've ended before. It's not as permanent as you believe." That earned her a sharper current. She felt her knees buckle, though they barely touched the unstable floor. The edges of her vision grayed, then flared with light. Somewhere inside that light was a memory, a winter field, the sound of crows, and she held on to it like a rope. The pain came in waves now, each one overlapping the last, until they were indistinguishable. She let them wash through, not fighting, only enduring. The last thing she registered was the Dorlan's voice again, speaking to someone she couldn't see. "You will regret the line you are about to cross." Then the current surged once more, and her heart missed its rhythm. Another surge, and it stopped. There was no drama to her death. No drawn-out collapse. One moment she was hanging in the web of lines, breath shallow but steady, and the next her weight sagged against the restraints, utterly still. The Virex checked the readout, lips curling in satisfaction. It is done. The Dorlan didn't answer. They stepped back into the shadow, their gaze unreadable. Her body was lowered to the floor, the restraints released. A medic confirmed the absence of pulse, respiration, brain activity. Time of death recorded, they said flatly. The guards lifted her onto a floating gurney and wheeled her through the same corridors. But now the route dipped downward, into the colder levels where light was scarce and the air felt thicker. The morgue was a low, narrow chamber with walls lined in sealed compartments. They slid her into one, the door closing with a muted hiss. The gurney hummed away. Silence returned, broken only by the soft, constant vibration of the station's core. It was not absolute silence. Beneath it, so faint it might have been mistaken for an electrical anomaly, there was another rhythm, irregular, deliberate. 27 minutes passed in measured increments. At the 23rd, a flicker of movement in the shadows. At the 25th, the faintest rasp of cloth against metal. At the 27th, the compartment door unlocked without any command. She sat up, the motion unhurried, her head rolling once to each side as though testing the hinges of her neck. Her eyes opened, not with the languid haze of revival, but with a clear, cold focus of someone returning to unfinished work. She swung her legs out and lowered herself to the floor, bare feet making no sound. Her hands flexed experimentally. The skin at her wrists was raw where the cuffs had been, but her grip was steady. The first guard never had the chance to speak. She caught him by the collar as he rounded the corner, pulling him forward and twisting until he crumpled soundlessly. She lowered him gently to the floor, more to keep the noise down than for mercy. The second she approached from behind, her fingers finding the seam in his armor where neck met shoulder. A quick press, and he was out before his rifle could clear its sling. She took the rifle, inspected it, and set it against the wall. Too loud, too final. She preferred tools that allowed for conversation. From the unconscious guard's belt, she pulled a thin, curved blade, ceremonial, by the look of it, never intended for actual use. It would do. The corridors were different now. She moved like someone who had walked them a dozen times, counting steps, noting each junction. A pair of security drones passed overhead. She waited in the shallow alcove between two storage doors until they were gone. No alarm sounded. The morgue level, it seemed, was not considered a source of trouble. When she emerged into the upper halls, the hum of the station's heart was louder, more insistent. She followed it until she reached a maintenance hatch. A quick twist of the blade, and the panel came free. Inside was the bundle she had hidden in the lining of her coat hours before her capture. A thin packet of woven circuitry no larger than her palm. She slid it into her sleeve. She didn't rush. Every step was measured, every glance deliberate. A passing pair of technicians looked through her as though she belonged. That was the trick, not to avoid notice, but to invite the wrong kind of notice, the kind that assumed you were someone else entirely. The Dorlan was waiting in the corridor outside the primary lift, their hands still folded, their expression unreadable. They regarded her for a long moment. "You were dead," they said quietly. She inclined her head. "And now I'm late." They didn't move to stop her. Instead, they stepped aside, their gaze following her as she passed. There was no triumph in her face, only the kind of calm that suggested the next move had already been decided long before this day began. The lift doors closed around her. In the narrow space, she exhaled once, a slow release. The compartment smelled faintly of ozone and something sharper, metallic. She pressed her hand to the control panel, and the packet in her sleeve interfaced with the system in a series of rapid, silent pulses. Lights flickered, then stabilized. The floor began to rise. When the doors opened again, she stepped out into a corridor she had seen only once before, in the brief moments of her escorted arrival. Now it was quiet, empty. The overhead lights dimmed for cycle change. She could hear her own footsteps. She could also hear, faintly, the shifting cadence of boots several halls away. Guards on the move. They didn't know she was here, not yet, but they would. She stopped at a door marked in a language not her own. The lock recognized the packet signal and slid open. Inside, the air was cooler, drier. Rows of consoles and projection arrays lined the walls, each showing streams of data. She crossed to the central display and began entering commands. The system resisted at first, but she leaned into it with the patience of someone coaxing a lock she'd picked 100 times before. Screens shifted, maps redrew themselves, and somewhere deep in the station, a low alarm began to sound. She didn't look up when the door behind her hissed open. She only said, 27 minutes. That's how long it takes for your morgue to cycle an anomaly before purging records. I'm afraid you're a little too late. The figure in the doorway hesitated, then stepped back. She smiled without turning. Go on. Tell them. I'll be here when they arrive. And somewhere far below, in the cold and silent morgue, the compartment she had left swung gently open again, as though waiting for her return. The first guard she passed lay face down in the corridor. His rifle neatly leaned against the wall beside him, as if he'd set it there for later. Baba Yaga didn't break stride. The lift doors ahead slid open without request, the controls still under the quiet influence of the packet in her sleeve. When they closed behind her, she straightened her coat, smoothed a hand over her hair, and let her mouth curve into a smile that wasn't meant for joy. She was about to walk into a room full of predators who thought she was prey. The central hall of the Virex administrative tier was a cathedral of intimidation. High-arched walls, cold light spilling from hidden panels, the air carrying the faint, dry scent of machinery kept too clean. At the far end, beneath the crest of their curling sigil, the interrogators sat at a broad table surrounded by aides, officers, and the doorman, whose hands rested folded in front of them like a priest at a funeral. Conversations died the moment she stepped through the doorway. Dozens of eyes, some glassy, some unblinking, turned to her with a single, synchronized movement. She walked as if she had been invited. Halfway to the table, she stopped, picked up a teapot from a service tray meant for the officers, and poured herself a cup. The thin ceramic felt almost weightless in her hand. She added nothing to it, drank once, and set the cup down directly in front of the interrogator before seating herself without being asked. The cuffs were gone. No one had noticed them vanish. You're supposed to be dead, the interrogator said, his tone caught somewhere between accusation and disbelief. You're supposed to be polite, she replied, voice even. Imagine our mutual disappointment. The Dorland's gaze held hers for a moment longer than the others dared. We are aware you have moved through secure areas without clearance. That is not possible. It's terribly possible, she said. Your locks are charming. They remind me of the ones on my grandmother's pantry. Pretty, but not built for someone determined enough. A murmur ran through the gathered officers. The interrogator lifted a hand for silence. You've killed 2 of my men. She tilted her head, feigning thought. One is sleeping off a poor career choice. The other may have a limp. I prefer not to waste resources. Her fingers traced the rim of her teacup. You do the wasting for both of us. The faint hiss of the ventilation system seemed louder in the pause that followed. She used it, letting the quiet stretch until it was taut. Then she leaned forward. You know, where I'm from, we drink tea when something important is about to happen. You take a moment, breathe in the steam, and decide how the day will end. You, however, look as if you haven't decided yet. The interrogator's ridged brow lowered. And you think you will decide for us? Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Oh no, I decided before I arrived. One of the younger officers, a Virex with pale, almost translucent skin, leaned toward the interrogator and whispered something too low for her to catch. She caught the movement, though, and shifted her gaze to pin the youth in place. If you have advice for your commander, speak it aloud. Secrets rot faster than truth. The Dorland cleared their throat, a sound like stones turning underwater. You came here intentionally. Not to escape with information. Not to bargain. To do something. Observation, she said simply. You learn more in a kitchen than on a battlefield. "This is no kitchen," the interrogator snapped again. Her tone softened to the point of condescension. "It is exactly a kitchen, and I am deciding which of you will boil first." The officers shifted uneasily. She could see it in their posture, the subtle angle of bodies turning toward the exits, the small recalculations of risk. She sipped her tea again, letting the bitter taste sit on her tongue. "Do you know the thing about humans you've never quite grasped?" she asked, her voice casual. "We are not strongest, not fastest, not hardest to kill. But we are the most patient animals you will ever meet. Patience and the memory of injury. Combine the two, and you have something you cannot contain in your tidy little cells." The interrogator leaned back in his chair, as if putting space between them would give him control. "We contained you well enough to kill you." Her eyes held his. "And now you know that wasn't the end." There was a sharp intake of breath somewhere behind her. She let it hang. "Tell me," she continued, "what did you think would happen when you pulled the life out of me? That the rest of my kind would weep quietly into their ration packs? That your little data files would close neatly?" "We don't close, Commander. We hinge." The Dorlan spoke again, quieter now. "You are not here for your survival. You are here to set something in motion." She nodded once. "And now it is moving." An aide burst into the hall from the far door, panting. He hurried to the interrogator's side and whispered frantically. The commander's eyes flicked toward her, then back to the aide. His jaw tightened. She knew the look. He'd just learned something about systems going offline, about doors locking from the inside, about communications going nowhere they should. She stood, gathering the teapot in both hands and refilling her cup with deliberate slowness. "This is the part," she said, "where we have tea, and you pretend to consider your options. You will imagine scenarios in which you emerge victorious. You will lie to yourself about the timeline. But deep down," she set the pot down with a soft click, "deep down you already know this room is not yours anymore." The pale-skinned officer blurted, "How?" and then flinched as if expecting punishment for the outburst. She turned her gaze to him and let it soften into something almost maternal. "How does bread rise? You mix the right things and let them sit. Everything after that is inevitable." The interrogator slammed a hand onto the table. "You will tell us what you've done." Her expression flattened. "Commander, you have exactly as much time as this tea stays warm to decide whether you're going to die confused or informed." The Dorlan's voice cut through the tension. "If she speaks truth, we may have already lost control of our systems." "If," the interrogator repeated bitterly. The Dorlan didn't look away from Baba Yaga. She has spoken in ifs since her capture, and yet she has never once said she came here to leave. A murmur of unease spread again. She could see it, order beginning to fray, the edges of command curling like paper over flame. She stood, taking her cup with her, and walked around the table, close enough to brush the shoulder of one officer who tensed like a coiled spring. She stopped behind the interrogator, leaning slightly toward his ear. "I told you on the first day, I only wanted tea. The rest of this is just what happens when no one listens." She set the cup down in front of him, still steaming. "Decide quickly. The kitchen is heating up." The aide returned, this time with fear written openly across his features. "Systems are responding to unauthorized inputs. Origin unknown. Security doors are cycling without orders. Docking bays," he broke off, glancing toward her. "Docking bays are locking." The interrogator rose sharply, chair scraping against the floor. "This is an act of war." "Is it?" she said. "Or is it simply the consequence of your own hospitality?" She brushed past him, reclaiming her cup, and moved toward the door. No one stopped her. The Dorlan spoke once more, their voice carrying across the frozen hall. "If she leaves this room, we will never see her again." She paused at the threshold, glancing over her shoulder. "Of course you'll see me again. I'm not leaving." A faint smile ghosted across her lips. "Not yet." And then she was gone, the door whispering shut behind her, leaving the taste of bitter tea and the echo of her last words hanging in the cold air. The station's corridors felt different now, not because they had changed, but because she had. Each step was measured, quiet, The weight of inevitability coiled in her spine. Behind her, the council hall still hummed with unease, their voices pitched low, as though whispering could contain what was already spreading through the walls. The packet in her sleeve pulsed against her wrist like a heartbeat. It was almost done. While the Virex had been congratulating themselves on her capture, while they had poured their resources into breaking her, that little weave of circuitry had been breathing through the station's veins, listening, learning, planting roots deep enough to be invisible, until they flowered all at once. She reached the observation deck overlooking the primary docking array. From here she could see the curve of the outer bays, their heavy blast doors closed, indicator lights shifting from green to amber, from amber to red. A crew of mechanics stood clustered around a console, confusion flashing in their movements. She watched them like a gardener might watch weeds, knowing they'd be gone soon enough. The Dorland found her there, arriving without sound. They stood a step behind her shoulder, their voice low. "You've locked the docks." "Yes." She didn't turn. "You've been keeping ships here for a meeting that never mattered. Now they can't leave." "Why?" No anger in the question, only the kind of curiosity that can be dangerous if given time to grow. "Because you were never the point," she said. "The Virex think they are the crown of this quadrant. They've spent decades picking off what they think are threats, piece by piece. But the only real threat is the one they never saw." The Dorland was silent a long moment. "You." She finally turned to face them. "Us." Boots struck metal somewhere deeper in the station. Heavy, purposeful. A squad. She could tell by the rhythm they were moving toward the array control rooms. She walked past the Dorland toward a narrow maintenance hatch, her voice trailing behind her like a thread. "I'm not here to kill them. I'm here to hold them still long enough." The hatch opened into a spine of steel and cable that ran the station's length. The air was warm here, buzzing faintly with a low thrum of energy moving through conduits. She crawled until she reached a junction node, a globe of polished alloy bristling with connectors. The packet in her sleeve detached with a gentle click. She pressed it into the heart of the node. The lights dimmed. Somewhere far above, a siren began to howl, not the sharp wail of a breach alarm, but the low, mournful call of a system realizing it had lost its own hands. Through the cables, her voice was barely more than a whisper. "Now they can see." A moment later, the station's comm network, still in the Virex's proud control a heartbeat ago, flared alive with images. Every screen, every hollow, every private console showed the same thing, a composite of intercepted transmissions, the Virex's own records laid bare. Entire settlements stripped for resources. Treaties broken before the ink dried. Executions broadcast as warnings. And threaded through it all, a pattern of hunts, subtle, methodical, tracing every step closer to human colonies. In the council hall, the interrogator would be watching it with the others, watching themselves revealed in their own words, unable to shut it off. She imagined the moment his gaze would flicker to the Dorland, seeking explanation, and find none. Footsteps clanged on the maintenance spine. She turned as the first soldier crawled into view, armor catching the dim light. His rifle was up, the lens of its targeting system locking on her chest. She didn't move. "You don't want to shoot," she said evenly. "Not because I'll stop you, though I will, but because the only thing holding this station together is in my hand right now." The soldier hesitated. That was all she needed. Her free hand darted forward, catching the rifle's barrel and twisting. The shot went into the ceiling with a dull thump. She shoved him sideways into the bulkhead and slid past before he could recover. By the time she emerged back into the array control center, 2 more soldiers had arrived, but they froze at the sight of her. Not because of her, because of the screens around them. Everyone showed a different sector feed now, not from the station's own logs, but from far beyond. Human ships moving into formation. Fleets of them, sleek and purposeful. Engines flaring like embers about to catch. The Dorland stepped in behind her, their gaze flicking to the images. They were waiting for this. "Yes," she said. "I died to give them the time to be ready. And now every gate you control will close behind you, and every port you've taken will turn its guns inward." The interrogator's voice cracked over the station comm, tight with fury. Shut it down. Shut her down now. She smiled faintly at the ceiling. You can't shut down a seed after it sprouts. You should know that, Commander. You've been planting your kind of seeds for years. The soldiers still hadn't moved. She let her eyes rest on each in turn until they lowered their weapons. Good. Now go home. Or stay and see how quickly your masters will spend your lives when they realize they can't win. The Dorlan studied her for a long time. You could have left after you woke. You could have escaped cleanly. And leave the kitchen half-cooked? She shook her head. No. You don't walk away from a meal until it's ready. From the observation glass, she could see ships in the docks powering down, trapped. Smaller craft, patrol cutters, couriers, were already sealed in their berths. On the edge of the sensor range, a human vanguard appeared. First a single signature, then dozens, then hundreds, until the whole horizon seemed to burn with their arrival. This is the part, she said softly, where they realized they'd been standing in my hunting blind. The Dorlan's expression was unreadable. And what happens to the ones inside with you? That, she said, depends on whether they stay still or thrash. The sirens deepened in pitch. A series of hollow booms echoed through the deck as the docking clamps engaged without request, locking every vessel into place. The Virex had lost control of their own spine, their own breath. The interrogator's voice returned, lower now, as if pitched to her alone. What do you want? She took her time answering, watching the human fleet close the distance. I want you to understand that humanity doesn't start wars. But if you corner us, if you make the mistake of thinking we're tame, we will finish them in ways you cannot unlearn. Is that a threat? No, she said. It's a recipe. The human fleet slowed, taking position just outside the engagement range of the station's weapons. They didn't fire. They waited, engines humming like held breath. She knew every captain in that formation was watching for her signal. She also knew she wouldn't need to give it. The Virex would break themselves trying to wriggle free. She turned to the Dorlan. When I leave here, you'll tell your people I could have killed you all. That I didn't. Some of them will take that as mercy. Some will take it as insult. Either way, they'll remember. Why spare us? Her gaze drifted back to the glass. Because fear fades. Memory doesn't. And I need you to remember me exactly as I am right now.